Namaskar and welcome to yet another edition of Insight. I am Charu Karthike. In this edition, we will be talking about the World Economic Forum, the summit that was held recently from January 22nd to 27th in Davos, where more than 2,500 business leaders, government representatives and academicians assembled to take a look at the problems that the world is facing and also try to find solutions to the major problems. In this edition, we'll be trying to take a look at what were the messages, essentially what are the big messages that have come out from the deliberations held at this 5-day event in Davos. And joining us in Insight today is a distinguished panel of experts. On my left is senior journalist and India representative of Central European News, Shantanu Guhare. Shantanu, thank you so much for joining us here. Sitting right next to him is chairman of the Economic Affairs Committee of PhD Chambers of Commerce and Industry, Mr. S.K. Sarkar. Mr. Sarkar, thank you so much for joining us here. And very soon we are also expecting to be joined by Vice Chairman of the Indian Institute of Finance, Dr. Aman Agarwal. Shantanu, I would like to begin with you. If we can take a look at the bigger picture first and then try to zoom in a little bit. The big message that came out from the World Economic Forum.
I think interestingly, for the last couple of years, Davos hasn't been able to send a strong signal across the world to all its participants. The people have met, they haven't found solutions, but they have debated. This time, what was very important and very vital, many people highlighted, was two things. First, there was a huge warning, both from political and corporate leaders across the world against what they call global complacency. They urged all nations to speed up their efforts to unite and do trade as fast as possible. The second point, which all of them unanimously agreed, was the fact that why jobs are not happening. Jobs need to happen. What would an average young man across the world do once he passes out of college? Was the main issue raised by none other than Coca-Cola's Mukhtar Kent, and it was widely echoed across the Alps, the place where Davos held. I think both are very significant. It is very vital in the current context as we talk, as India and Pakistan go through a tumultuous relationship. It is important because if we had this pipeline in place, discussed more than 15 years ago, I can guarantee you, Charu, that these problems wouldn't have occurred. We wouldn't be talking about other violence, headless bodies and all of that if economics had grown over multiple times between such bordering nations. Economy is vital, and that is what Davos this time discussed. Everyone discussed it, including Imran Khan, who was there as the Tehreek-e-Insaf's representative and who is a prime minister aspirant of Pakistan. He also raised the same issue, that it is important that economic talks must continue between India and Pakistan. I'm putting it in Indian context only. On a global scale, the fear people have come to agree that uncertainty will still remain, but there are chances that the euro will not collapse totally in Europe. And there are signs of the US economy slowly bouncing back, which means US will once again be able to dictate some terms in the global trade scene. So I guess these were the broad points that came out in Davos. India was represented by a large number of industries. They made their various points there. We can come back to that later. But the moot point once again from all Indian companies was, it is important for the government to make way and ensure a level playing field in which industry can grow. If that is not happening, the industry will not grow. And if industry doesn't grow, it's a cyclical effect. The jobs will not happen. So these were broadly the vital points.
Okay. Mr. Sarkar, the IMF chief said at Davos that do not relax is the prescription that I would like to give all world leaders, something that Shantanu also seems to be talking about when he says that guarding against global complacency was the one big message that came out of the World Economic Forum. Your take on that?
Well, Shantanu talked about jobless growth, and which is a fact. In fact, what hit the economic world very hard was the 2008 crisis, and thereafter it's been a very muted kind of a. I mean, I got the impression that Davos this time was fairly muted in the sense that the optimism was lacking. It wasn't really coming to the fore, despite the fact that the financial markets have taken off. I mean, the stock markets are up by quite a considerable bit all over the world, and interests are very benign today. Inflation hardly any outside India. And all these factors combined should have given them a more of a leg up, which did not happen because of the fact that we have had a situation in which the demand somehow is very static. So that's the situation in which the world is working today. Talking about Europe, well, it's a bit of a surprise to me personally that Germany is not doing as well as it should have been doing, and it is the biggest economy in Europe. And all over Europe there is an issue. You have Spain, Portugal, Italy, you name it, they have their issues. And US, yes, US is picking up now, and US should be doing well in the future. US always, I thought, was a very innovative country, and it does know how to come out of a crisis, and it is coming out of that crisis. But what remains is today is that who are the persons who are making all the decisions in the economic world? It appears to me that the central banks who are doing it all over the world. You have the Fed Reserve in the US, you have the European Central Bank in Europe, and you, of course, the Reserve Bank, our Reserve Bank. If you combine all these factors, they are calling the shots in the sense that that they are today saying that, okay, let's give you, I mean, especially the West is giving a lot of liquidity and saying that we are almost at 0%, near zero, and please go ahead and invest. But that's not happening because after all, I think it's playing on the human mind. It's the psychological psyche is playing a big part here, saying that if I invest today, I'm not too sure whether my capacity building is going to help me tomorrow or not. So it's better to hold back and see what happens over the next 2 years. And what the IMF chief said, and which I agree with, is 2013 is going to be more of an year in which we have to sustain ourselves rather than think of growth, and the growth would come only from 2014 onwards. That's how I see the situation right now.
Okay, Shantanu, different messages were sent out for different regions of the world economy. There were different expectations for the American economy, a different assessment for the Eurozone, for India and China individually as well as together, then for Japan, and then the rest of the emerging markets. Let us first of all begin with the big messages that came out for America and the Eurozone, two economies which have been struggling since the global crisis hit in 2007-8, and sort of just beginning to move ahead from the worst times. What were the messages for them that came out from the WEF?
I think the Euro's biggest message is that Euro will not collapse actually, which was the biggest fear. Greece continues to be a very volatile zone. There are other countries which are slowly recovering. German economy, as Mr. Sarkar rightly say, hasn't done very well. But Europe is not crumbling, which of course representatives from the UK Bank also said time and again that the signs of recovery are already there. So there was a cautious optimism. Now let's focus on USA. The stock markets in USA have slowly started to turn around, which is definitely a good signal. Now, whether that translates into more business, whether that translates into a situation that more and more American companies will try and put money on their stocks in the market, so the market can trigger a veritable boom, we just have to wait and see. Representative American companies, including think tanks and analytical and consulting agencies like Boston Consultancy Group and McKinsey, have already said it very clearly that 2013 you are not expecting any growth. We are just waiting. We will have to wait and see how much of growth potential we can extract when the year turns 2014. Now let's come to India and China. India and China's biggest problem, particularly let's take India first, was implementation. Anand Sharma, who represented us there, was very upset when time and again people kept on asking him all kinds of things, and he said, very visibly tired, we saw that on the television, and he said people expect a lot from India, but there has been a lot of reforms which has already happened in India, which in terms of comparison, if you compare it with, let's say, a US or Europe, that kind of reforms haven't happened. Point taken that reforms have happened, but he also agreed that implementation remains the key, because Transparency International and a couple of other companies, think tanks, have also raised this point of view that those systems exist in BRIC nations, of which India is also a part, unless of course Indonesia replaces it. The implementation was a key factor, which I fully agree with, because China has been able to beat India hands down on an issue like this. Implementation has been a problem.
Yeah.
We have taken measures, but in terms of its implementation, we have always gone back to the highest court of the country, the Supreme Court, and sought its permission. And time and again, a legal intervention has not only delayed things, it has also made the investor wary that probably implementation could be a problem in this country, as evident in the recent cases, retail being one such example.
Okay.
So these were the factors for India.
Okay. Well, on that note, it's time for us to slip into a very short break. We'll take a more detailed look at what did India gain from the World Economic Forum. India had sent a very strong contingent, and also it was led by at least 4 Union Cabinet ministers. We'll try to find out what are the lessons that came out from World Economic Forum for India. But on the other side, do stay tuned to Inside We'll be back in a very short while.
पानी की इतनी किल्लत, कहीं ये आपका भविष्य तो नहीं? ऐसे भविष्य से बचने के लिए बारिश के पानी का संरक्षण कीजिए और पानी रखिए
बचा बचा के।
टैंक फुल कर दीजिए। रुकिए रुकिए रुकिए।
क्या हो गया भाई साहब?
ये क्या है? पेट्रोल पे टैक्स?
सॉरी भाई साहब, ये लो भाई साहब, ठीक हो गया।
हाँ।
1000 का पूरा कर दूं क्या?
वो कैसे?
ऐसे।
अरे 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 अरे, ये क्या कर रहे हो? अरे लिक्विड तो खुद ही बर्तन की शक्ल ले लेता है ये हिलाने से। कोई ज्यादा आएगा क्या? यार मुझे तुम पर भरोसा नहीं है। वो डब्बा कहाँ है? बुलाओ 5 लीटर का डब्बा अपना, भरो उसमें पेट्रोल। मैं देखता हूँ तुम्हारा मीटर सही है या नहीं।
खरीदारी करते वक्त पूरी जानकारी ले लें। याद रहे, आपकी सतर्कता ही आपका बचाव है।
जागो ग्राहक जागो।
मानव शरीर के बीमारियों से बचाव के विभिन्न तरीके एवं आधुनिक चिकित्सा पद्धति व उसमें उपयोग किए जाने वाले उन्नत उपकरणों को समझिए। लोकसभा टीवी से प्रत्येक शनिवार प्रसारित होने वाले कार्यक्रम जीते रहो में।
साइकिल रिपेयर शॉप। जब मैं बड़ा हो जाऊंगा ना, तब मैं साइकिल रिपेयर की दुकान खोलूंगा।
क्यों?
जिस तरह आप सब पेट्रोल वेस्ट कर रहे हैं, फ्यूचर में तो पेट्रोल बचेगा ही नहीं। तब तो सब साइकिल ही चलाएंगे ना।
खुद ही सारा पेट्रोल खत्म करेंगे या कुछ अपने बच्चों के लिए भी छोड़ेंगे? प्लीज कम से कम सिग्नल पे तो इंजन ऑफ कीजिए।
Welcome back. You're watching Insight, and today we are talking about the World Economic Forum that concluded in Davos recently. Joining us in the discussion at this point of time is economist and Vice Chairman of the Indian Institute of Finance, Dr. Aman Agarwal. Aman, thank you so much for joining us here.
Thank you.
Aman, we are taking a look at, first of all, the big picture, the big messages that came in from the World Economic Forum. More than 2,500 leaders had assembled and were sort of brainstorming about the problems that the world economy is facing, not just the economy, but on political and other fronts too. We'll come to the messages for India by and by, but to begin with, your biggest takeaway from the World Economic Forum.
You see, the World Economic Forum began with a very noble structure, bringing in leaders both in the government, political, as well as the corporate world, together to create some kind of unanimous approach to have more synchronized growth and structures for the world. However, last couple of years it has been observed that the World Economic Forum seems to have become a club for some of the people to basically tune and bring in strategies to how to go about exploiting developing countries and taking out what could be given to and make their own revenue pockets up. What it is expected to do, what they talk about, either it is risk or bringing in efficiency or reducing these downfalls or NPS. Almost all banks and financial institutions are there, and they always conduct these meetings in the beginning of the year, now even during the year in different regions of the world as well.
Okay.
But despite all these meetings, none of these NPA problems or bank financial problems have been resolved. If their meetings were effective and what they were thinking about had some coherence to go forward, then some of these problems would have automatically got resolved, because the who's who of the world is available there at all the three sectors. It is not the corporate world only, it is the corporate, the government, as well as the politicians, the people who make things move in the world around at the top level are there. So if that was the case, then I think it would have brought in some fruits, but it doesn't seem to bring in, and only brings in the fact that how are they going to revamp their structures of profit pockets out of the cost which the developing nations have to pay at the end of the year.
Okay. Shantanu, that's an interesting take. Aman says that this has become more like a platform for exploiting developing economies and their weaknesses rather than instilling more confidence and taking them on board as far as solving the problems of the world economy is concerned.
I think Aman Agarwal is India's Noral Rubini, or Mr. Doom, as the world said in 2008. He said the same thing at the World Economic Forum. And what is he saying? He's saying you have every machinery in place, but if you do not handle your problems at home, things can automatically spiral out of your control. You can have state control, as Kamal Nath emphasized at the World Economic Forum this time, that state control is very important. We must have regulatory mechanisms in place. And Rubini countered that. He said, look at the BRIC nations. All the BRIC nations have huge state involvement and interference. As a result, they are shying away from market economies. And as a result of which, they are working in complete isolation. Global companies, they are wondering whether to go and invest there. China somewhat has still moved away and moved ahead, but the rest of the BRIC nations, including India, is struggling. NPA is a huge problem. The banks haven't sorted it out. And if I take one example of Kingfisher Airline, it is horrifying enough to realize how an average taxpayer's money has gone completely wiped out. On the second front, in telecom, the entire money that the Norwegian telecom giant Telenor brought in has been completely wiped out, and that is actually from a pension fund of Norway. That means old people's savings in Norway have got wiped out in India because of some corrupt politician and his mechanisms. Now that is an issue that people have to solve. It is an issue that state interference or state's involvement is fine. Regulatory mechanisms can be in place, but if there is no proper implementation of what the court is suggesting, it becomes a serious problem, and that's why a logjam can always happen.
No, but isn't this state regulation the very thing which kept us insulated from suffering a big deal of impact of the financial crisis?
That means you opened one door, you closed one door, and you remained insulated because Indians believed, in bulk of the Indians believed in too much of saving in banks, and rather only 3% or 5% went to the stock markets. So obviously we didn't suffer from the global downturn.
That's right.
But at the same time, it is up to the banks. They, because of sheer political influence, they kept on opening up their doors and their coffers to various loans and various credits and various overdraft facilities to a lot of companies which they can't even recover. So whose money are they giving away? They are giving away common man's money. So there is a regulation, there is a system, there is the RBI which is now trying to regulate these banks and tell them, as a result, we keep hearing that there are constant frictions between the finance minister's office and the RBI and also the bank chairmen. They don't like being told by RBI that they are going horribly wrong in some of the cases as pointed out by Mr. Agarwal, including in NPA, and that's a big problem. Look at the growth of these para-banking companies all over the country. They're coming up, they're picking up money from the gullible villagers, promising huge returns, giving money in the first couple of installments and then disappearing. The money gets lost. So that's what I'm saying, the mechanism is perfectly in place, but you have to implement that mechanism to ensure that the common man, it does good to the common man. If that doesn't happen, that there is a problem. And that is the problem which was discussed in Davos, that too much of state interference is also a problem. You have to let market economics and market players come in and play some games there, otherwise it becomes a problem.
Mr. Sarkar, one essential question that emanates from that observation made by Aman is that as a platform that brings such a large number of leaders from across the world, what is the World Economic Forum doing to address the sort of an imbalance between the rich and the developing economies that exists?
Well, before I answer that question of yours, on a lighter vein, you did talk about 2,500 delegates that attended Davos. It appears that they have three categories. First category is the political leaders. Second category is the persons like Mr. Rahul Bajaj, and then the third category. So you get your private entries, you don't get your private entries, plus, plus, plus. So anyway, so that's the point which coming back to you, you mentioned about, sorry, can you repeat that question, please?
What, as a platform, what is the World Economic Forum doing to address the imbalances between the rich and the developing economies?
Well, presently they're struggling amongst themselves. I don't think they're really concentrating on the developing economies totally. Let me give you an example. Let's talk about Europe. Financially, Europe as a region is very, very strong. In fact, I mean, I would even go to the extent of saying that if Europe were to be out of the world context, global context, they will still survive. But they have issues. Like David Cameron said that if he's re-elected, he would be asking for a vote on whether UK should remain within the European Union at all or not. Now, why is he asking that question? Is he not very confident about the EU? Now, the second question is the Basel III norms, which are to come in now. Every bank is clamoring for the fact that let's put it aside. Let this happen much later. The capital adequacy ratio can come a little later. Why? What is the issue in these things? And obviously that is being followed in India today, in which that it has been put back now, and it was to be implemented from 1st of April 2013. It's not being done. It does give us picture of a lot of pessimism in the sense that it does suck out a bit of a liquidity from the system. But that being so, I think it is something which you need to have a global system on this and go ahead and implement it. Why is this scare? So there is a fear psychosis somewhere. Something is happening which may not be, which is not being said by these world economic leaders, which they may be aware of, they may not be aware of, or they are a little scared of an incident which might happen. Is it because of I go back to the 2008 crisis. Is it because of that they do not want to talk too much about, they don't want to be too liberal today? So obviously if they're looking at the developing economies, this is basically to find a market for themselves, nothing beyond that. They're not looking at developing economies taking off at a vertical angle or something which could help the global economy as a whole. But this is subject to supplement their own production, their own services.
Okay. I mean, at this edition of this summit, somebody did say, in fact, it was mentioned very briefly, but I don't know whether it dominated the discourse or not, but somebody did say that the rich nations need to thank the developing economies for keeping the growth story intact for the last 5 or 6 years that the rich nations have been struggling. But was this a dominating discourse? Was this just one-off comment?
This is a reality and a fact, in fact. If you really look at the global development reports which have been coming out for last 12 years now out of the IMF, they clearly show from 1999 onwards, in fact, that the capital flows have reversed worldwide. Instead of the net capital flows are from developing to developed countries. It is not from developed to developing countries. You tend to believe that it is the rich who will be funding the poor, so the money will flow from the top to the bottom. It's not the way. The Global Development Report, which comes out from IMF, clearly indicates for the last 10 years that the flows going out of developing countries, there are flows both sides, but the net flows are typically from developing countries to developed. And even if you look at a corporate environment, you see all these big companies, when they float their equity shares, who does fund these equity shares? It's a common man. It's a small man on the street who buys his share and he actually funds those big projects of 6,000 crores, 10,000 crores, 50,000 crores, which are in place by different companies around the country, and not only in India but worldwide. So it is actually the developing countries which are actually financing not only in legalized money but even in illegal money, which is kept as a money laundered money in various countries which have harbored Europe, Switzerland, not tax havens. They are basically, on the name of privacy, a lot of money laundered money comes even in the United States. If you look at regions which are next to Mexico or Miami, they have become money laundering hubs, and they are typically harboring that money, and these regions are typically growing because of the money which comes in for this particular specific purpose in banks and financial institutions moving into the economic system. Now that has not been debated or controlled because the flavor that the developed must finance the developing or the rich must provide to the poor has always been the talk, and they are very happy with this because at the end of the day, by saying this, they're able to flush out more money and funds and resources from the developing region. And you know what better can they have? They get a good publicity, plus they're able to get more resources. What better world would they want? The clear focus is What is the forum for? OECD, group of economically developed nations. Their focus is to reinvest their money into developing regions. Clear focus. OPEC, oil-based companies. Again, their focus is to raise the prices of oil, get more money for them. BIS, banks structure, collaborations, negotiations or rules for them. ADB or World Bank, developing funds, giving out funds. What is the purpose of World Economic Forum? There's hardly any academic person who could be accounted for who is actually being consulted or even being debated. Are they bringing out working papers which have to be debated and discussed? Are they actually coming out with policy prescriptions where they say, yes, we have decided to have economic growth, world economic growth of about 2% or 3%, and we are going to stick to it by reducing these problems which we are facing in the banking and the corporate world or in different countries. There are debates. Some of the politicians have raised issues regarding certain countries, but there is no outcome. What is at the end of the day is the outcome. A common man is looking for relief. He is not, whether it's India or any other country, he's looking for relief. A common man in the United States, a richest country in the world, is looking for relief. They have no jobs, no means of earning. And that has not been the case today. It has been arising out of 20 years. The Fed, the government and various other countries, they have known these kind of things happening. Europe, my colleague mentioned, is a weak link today. It is no longer that strong group which is financing the world around the globe. They have a lot of money, all mafia money, all Greece, big mafia money, Cyprus, Greek mafia money. Other countries are now also, Nordic region, large part of Nordic region is all kind of money which flows in. The gentleman who was the Prime Minister of Thailand who frauded Thailand and flew off, landed up in Finland. All that money, God knows where. He is typically living comfortable life. Banks, central banks are comfortable with this because as long as their liquidity is maintained, their reserves are intact, they get money coming in from whatever they will like, they have no problem. They are able to feed their people. But the important thing at the end is, what are the outcomes of this kind of a debate? Are we really having some benefit, or are we wanting to just plush up this Switzerland, the economy by having 2,500 people coming in, paying $2,000 a night rate and enjoying a nice evening dinner with someone very important, taking pictures, and at the end of the day, we'll meet next year and have a nice cup of tea again.
Our representatives...
One question, if I don't mind my interjecting here. Mr. Agarwal talked about money flowing from the developing countries to developed countries. True, absolutely true. What happens, let's talk about tomorrow. What happens if those developed countries do not honor their commitments? Now, would that have an impact on the world economy as a whole? Unfortunately, these are issues which have not been debated at Davos. I'm not talking about this particular issue, but any issues which he's very, very right, that it is not a forum where you discuss things to find solutions to global problems. They were more there to protect themselves rather than to talk about the world as a whole. It appeared to me to be a very selfish kind of a gathering.
Okay. Well, on that note, we are slipping into yet another break. If that is the fact, then is India conscious of the fact? What are the messages that we can understand from the way India approaches the World Economic Forum? All that and much more on the other side. Stay tuned to me. I'll be back in a very short while.
कितनी पेटी लाने को बोला था? कितना बोला था? बोलो? दो लाने को बोला था। और ये कितनी है? अरे भाई कितनी है? एक है ना? एक। अरे ये तुम्हारे भेजे में कुछ घुसता है कि नहीं? एक कान से सुनता है, दूसरे से निकाल देता है। क्या करूं मैं तुम्हारा?
बचपन में सही पोषण न मिले तो उसका असर जिंदगी भर रहता है। देर से समझ आना, याददाश्त कमजोर होना, बार बार बीमार पड़ना, ये सब कुपोषण के लक्षण हो सकते हैं। कुपोषण यानी सही पोषण का न मिलना। गर्भ से लेके जन्म के पहले 2 साल बच्चों में इसका सबसे ज्यादा खतरा होता है। आज देश का लगभग हर दूसरा बच्चा कुपोषण का शिकार है, यानी शरीर और दिमाग से कमजोर। तो आइए मिलकर कुपोषण के खिलाफ एक जंग छेड़ दें।
हमारे दादा इलाही चले आ रहे हैं। दादा ने भी पाल रखे थे, चाचा ने भी पाल रखे थे, अब हमने पाल रखे हैं। 40 साल से है शौक।
फायदा है, ताज़ी हवा मिल रही है, छत की हवा मिल रही है, निगाह तेज रहती है। अभी मैं बताऊँ ना कि बिल्ली मान तो हो के कबूतर आ रही है, तो बिल्ली मान तक कबूतर दिखाई दे रही है हमें।
जिस वक्त कबूतर उड़ रहे हो किसी के, प्लीज़ अपनी पतंग एक तरफ कर लें, कबूतरों में ना आने दें। उससे क्या होता है, उनके पर कट जाते हैं, वो जख्मी हो जाते हैं, गिर जाते हैं, कोई बिल्ली खा जाती है, कहीं गिर जाता है, मर जाता है।
देखिए पुरानी दिल्ली का ये अनोखा शौक। सुर्खियों से परे में शुक्रवार रात 8 बजे और रविवार शाम 5:30 बजे।
They say you haven't seen nothing till you've seen the Ran of Kutch. Watch our fascinating journey to the westernmost point of India in our special on the Ran Utsav.
Are men from Mars?
And women from Venus?
Who is the better half?
Who takes the decisions?
Who is responsible?
Who is demanding?
Who is submissive?
Who is independent?
Can men and women ever find common ground? To find out, watch Gender Discourse. Every Thursday, 4 p.m. only on Lok Sabha television.
Welcome back. You're watching Insight, and today we are talking about the World Economic Forum. Shantanu, as we were talking about, if this is the case that what Aman has been making, and Mr. Sarkar is also supporting this argument, that the developing countries are not really gaining much from this summit where world leaders come, in the sense that addressing the essential imbalance between the developing and the developed economies. It is essentially a forum where developed economies, representatives from the richer nations, are coming to protect their own interests. Are the developing economies conscious of this? What can we see in the way India approaches the World Economic Forum?
I don't think the developing economies are conscious of this. If India was conscious of its power crisis, the pipeline would have been in place. If India was conscious about land acquisition rights, then coal would have been mined, land would have been given, industry would have happened. But then everything is getting stuck in either the bureaucratic files or in reams and reams of papers in India's peculiar legal system, where more than 800 crores or whatever cases are pending. The world's biggest pending cases is India.
Then what does India go there for?
I think it's just a representation to highlight the point that
4 cabinet ministers, 4 high-ranking senior cabinet
because the reason
ministers.
being, you have to represent your case there. Let us not forget, worldwide credit rating agencies are trying or threatening to downgrade
junk,
you.
yes.
So you will have to essentially go and say and talk of growth, talk of market stimulators, talk of salary hikes and all of that, and then generally say that why is it people are not coming to India. You have to present your case.
Will our ministers hobnobbing at World Economic Forum, will it prevent credit rating agencies from further downgrading our status?
India has to strongly put its mechanism in place. Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's government has been seen as a weak government, and a couple of decisions regarding aviation, regarding retail, regarding fuel, has always been seen as very, very weak decisions. The stalemate that is happening in this country is prompting credit rating agencies to try and downgrade it. But let us not go too much into that. What is India's role at Davos? India's role is to try and gather from the world how much they are ready to invest in India, how much they can come in to solve some of India's peculiar problems, especially problems of the border. Let us not forget, India has huge opportunities if it opens up its borders for trade. We have not done that. Our border trade is still in the decade-old barter system zone. We haven't really grown. Next door, Pakistan is energy starved, it's food starved, it's cash starved, and we can easily help that country. Let's not forget, in the next Pakistan election, 40 million young Pakistanis will vote. If you Indian companies can try and push brands that those people would like to buy, they don't have to look to the West to buy those things. as a result, but then unfortunately doesn't happen as a result. Maruti sells this Alto here, and Suzuki sells Maran there. I don't understand why Maruti Suzuki can't just walk across the border and sell its cars. So I think this global merging, this is also a problem. I mean, this is not happening, and not just India, all these BRIC nations, they haven't taken these lessons. As a result, if you notice, countries like Indonesia, Philippines are doing fairly well as compared to India, China, Russia, Brazil. China, the biggest companies are controlled by the Chinese government. Same in Russia, the poor taxpayers' money has been used by people, by the rich, to invest in companies in which they control. Brazil, the government has tried and pushed and cut utility laws, and in India we have this logjam about implementation problems. So obviously there is an issue. I mean, I wish these 4 ministers who had gone there had raised this and said, and probably they should have discussed it threadbare and made people understand that India could still be a perfect destination for investment. I think Mr. Chidambaram was there. I mean, probably, I'm sure he must have made some solid pitches there, and he's hoping for the markets to slowly turn around. But I guess these are problems India has to handle, and these problems can't be wished away overnight. These problems will remain. And as long as these problems remain, the growth is not going to happen in this country. It's very clear about it.
Mr. Sarkar, some of the world's top leaders of the industry were also questioned about their perception about India and what do they feel about entering the Indian market in various fields. One of those who made the headlines was John Nelson, chairman of Lloyd's, and he was talked about his perception of the insurance market in India. And obviously he was quite spot on when he said that India remains to be one of the most underinsured markets of the world. But he also said that international insurers or insurers who were big in other markets across the world had this perception that there are difficulties in entering the Indian market, and therefore they are cautious about entering the Indian market. Serves to highlight a point that Shantanu was making. The developing countries are not picking up from the lessons of history. They are not helping their case themselves. How can they expect platforms like these to help their cases? What does that say about the perception?
Well, I think the major issue, and I think the developed countries are they're right to, and Lloyd's, of course, is right to the extent, is that financial inclusion doesn't exist in this country. And that is something where we need to do a lot of homework, which is an area which unless we improve there, we cannot expect these large finance companies to come into India and do business. And coming back to that 4 cabinet ministers which was being talked about before you posed the question to me, India's immediate problem today is the fiscal deficit and the current account deficit. They're very, very large, and they are absolutely maybe going out of hand also. And how do you make up this deficit? By getting FDI. And in fact, Mr. Chidambaram has been holding all these road shows only for that purpose. And this is what Mr. Anand Sharma was also trying to impress upon the business leaders in Davos when he talked about hand-holding. When he said that IKEA is not the lone case. He was talking to Tesco, and he told Tesco that if you are interested and if you want any hand-holding, we are ready for that. So that's the message which India is trying to send out, that please do come and invest in this country so that we can, there's a lot of things to be done in this country, which goes without saying. But my point here is that if I were representing India over there, I should be putting forward my India's viewpoint also. It is not just finance. Yes, finance is a very, very important component of business. But finance is not the only thing. There are resources, there are raw materials, and then there's labor. Why are we not talking about movement of labor? Why are we talking only about movement of finance? Because the developed countries are interested only in movement of finance. They do not talk about movement of labor at all. And obviously, raw materials also is an issue today, because if you look at Africa, it's been more or less, I would say, it's a hijacked continent today, in the sense that all the resources have been taken over by the MNCs, and they are holding on to that to strike at the right moment. So this being the case, these are factors which you need to be talked about, which is not being done. And yes, India needs to do its homework. As I said, financial inclusion is an area where we need to do a lot of work. But it is not just FDI which is going to solve all our problems. So just going there and I mean, I wouldn't say that we went there with a begging bowl, but just asking for money is not the answer to our problems, our economic problems, totally and completely.
Okay, I mean, would it serve India's interests better if we create the enabling provisions here first, and then maybe approach these platforms with the kind of request that we are going through, with the invitations, with the messages to the world economy, please come and invest, without backing it up with enabling provisions here. So if we approach this the other way around, would it help us better?
You see, it's a very interesting question. You know, it's like a chicken and egg kind of situation. When would we have those situations? When we have them, there will be more requirements coming up from the other side that we want this in addition to. So you're never ready. So there's no question of being ready to move forward. You are supposed to move forward first. Secondly, there has to be a clear objective. When these delegations from the government and the industry went to the WEF, they should have clear objectives. What are we looking for? One, certainly you need funds. You need money coming in. You have the requirements, you have the needs of the society, you have the needs of the government to be fulfilled, which the domestic segment is unable to cater to or take care of. You need more refined systems to come in, which some of these large corporations worldwide bring in, and reform the other systems which are in place. Now you need to get them in. They have been looking at India for the last 20 years now. It is the largest democracy. Almost all acts, rudimentary, are in place. So it's no problem for them. They know now for the last 15 years that money can actually move out in a few hours or a few days without a problem, which was not the case 15, 20 years back. Some of these major issues which people are concerned with have actually been resolved in the last 15 years. Then what is the problem? Downgrading makes a big roar in the stock markets, by newspaper, by media people, hardly makes a difference to India. Why? Because large amount of investment which comes into India is from within the country itself. An industrialist from Mumbai will invest in different parts of India, making up plants. Government will invest in various projects. PPP projects are partly government-owned projects. So it is coming in from either international agencies or government. They are immaterialistic towards the ratings given by any of the rating agencies. Secondly, where would these companies invest? What are the other avenues worldwide? Look at Latin America. It's a black hole. Leaving Brazil, which has good trade opportunities, it's a black hole, and America doesn't want to strengthen Brazil because of the Marco Polo, which is there, which is making them much stronger. So they don't want to strengthen it. You look at Africa, huge resources of raw material, very little growth. Most of the countries are run autocratically, no rules in place, big problems, military problems, civilian problems are there.
Apart from South Africa.
Yeah, leaving South Africa, it's a small country. It's a small country in total Africa belt. And they're not much of resources. The resources are more north of Africa. If you lock off Southeast Asia, the world has already burned their hands in 97, 98. The Southeast Asia is trying to come out of that kind of a situation in the last 15, 12 years or so. They have still not been able to recoup. Which other part? Russia, they have already tried it in the early 90s and the late 80s. There are huge resources. Europe is extensively dependent on Russia for especially energy needs in specific. What more? Ruble has toppled them down. Other resources they're not clear about. It's a fairly autocratic country as well. China, they already hold a huge amount of investments in China. Already whatever potential China could offer, these MNCs have already utilized. Where would the money go? Which is a safe haven for them to go? Smaller countries, they are already going little bit, but they are not safe about. So India is the only avenue to go for the money to go and grow. The growth is sustainable, it's comfortable, money moves out. Bottlenecks taken into account, all problems taken into account, India is the only growth economy around the world which anyone look at. And as a result, downgrading, no downgrading, hardly makes a difference for the purpose. They are looking at these instruments to bargain. What maximum can they get? But if the politicians are not available and they say, yes, we are available, come to us, and then nothing goes forth. Has any policy decision come forth that, okay, we have decided that four of these companies are going to march in and get these projects up in this country? A defense company like French defense company EDFS, which makes Airbus, has shifted its manufacturing unit 7 years back into India. That should be clear enough. Insurance companies like Aviva and others have moved their offices here. Clearly shows that the market is resilient and has good opportunities.
Okay. So you're saying that India does not have several of those bottlenecks that affect various economies across the world, and in that sense, India is at a very advantageous position as compared to several other economies. How can India use this position better to exploit these platforms more and more for its own benefit? Something that we're trying to take a look at on the other side of this break. Do stay tuned to Inside. We'll be back in a very short while.
बंद करो, निपट गया भैया।
काकी, घर में शौचालय कहाँ है? बहू को
घर में कहाँ, खुले में ही जाना पड़ेगा।
बहू, फिर तो तुम घूंघट भी खोल ही दो। एक तरफ तो आपको बहू का घूंघट भी सरकाना गवारा नहीं, और दूसरी तरफ उससे खुले में।
इस तरह तो हमने कभी सोचा ही नहीं था।
तो अब सोचो, घर में शौचालय बनवाओ और इस्तेमाल करो।
निर्मल भारत अभियान।
जहाँ सोच वहाँ शौचालय।
मानव शरीर के बीमारियों से बचाव के विभिन्न तरीके एवं आधुनिक चिकित्सा पद्धति व उसमें उपयोग किए जाने वाले उन्नत उपकरणों को समझिए लोकसभा टीवी से। प्रत्येक शनिवार प्रसारित होने वाले कार्यक्रम जीते रहो में।
ये हमारे दादा इलाही चले आ रहे हैं। दादा ने भी पाल रखे थे, चाचा ने भी पाल रखे थे, अब हमने पाल रखे हैं। 40 साल से है शौक।
फायदा है, ताज़ी हवा मिल रही है, छत की हवा मिल रही है, निगाह तेज रहती है। अभी मैं बताऊँ ना कि बिल्ली मान तो हो के कबूतर आ रही है, तो बिल्ली मान तक कबूतर दिखाई दे रही है हमें।
जिस वक्त कबूतर उड़ रहे हो, किसी के प्लीज अपनी पतंग एक तरफ कर लें, कबूतरों में ना आने दें। उससे क्या होता है, उनके पर कट जाते हैं, वो जख्मी हो जाते हैं, गिर जाते हैं, कोई बिल्ली खा जाती है, कहीं गिर जाता है, मर जाता है।
देखिए पुरानी दिल्ली का ये अनोखा शौक सुर्खियों से परे में शुक्रवार रात 8 बजे और रविवार शाम 5:30 बजे।
Welcome back. You're watching Insight, and today we're talking about the World Economic Forum that recently concluded in Davos. Shantanu, as we were talking before the break, that India has several advantages that several other economies of the world do not have. There are several bottlenecks that India is free from. India can better exploit these advantages that it has at platforms like these, where it hobnobs with the who's who of the world. What are the things that India needs to be conscious of? How can platforms like these be better exploited for India's own benefits?
Trade ties, relationship building, inking agreements, and eventually implementing that agreements is the best place is the World Economic Forum. You have the politicians there, you have the business leaders there, you have the World Bank, IMF, everyone, ADB, everyone there. You can easily handle it there. But see what has happened with Indian businessmen who were there. They rarely made any announcement that will perk up their shares back home. Bulk of the announcements that came out of Davos revolved around the fact how Indian companies are now trying to invest more in other countries. The big splash from India was Hindujas and their huge investment they're going into Africa. I still don't remember which was the last big Hinduja investment in India. Mr. Harish Munwani of Hindustan Liver has said that they will try and double their royalty payments to the main boss in London, the Unilever company. As a result, India, what will happen? India will lose corporate tax. Mr. Deveshwar has said ITC is trying to break from India, trying and penetrate other countries on its big rural hype, getting into things as looking into the various rural markets of international areas. They're trying to look at that. What ITC has been doing silently in the villages these days, they're trying to do that. The organic boom which the country, which Mr. Deveshwar's ITC is doing, far away from tobacco, because that's not a growth zone in this country. Satyam has said that they're trying to come out of the shadow of what happened with Ramalinga Raju and all of that, and the scam. Nowhere I saw a concrete decision being taken that, okay, in the next 1 year, we will do this. I keep coming back to mining, I keep coming back to the pipeline issues. Why? Because those are core to my country. As we talk, 2 weeks ago, the first ship carrying iron ore has already come into India. all our iron ore mining is completely shut down because of all these issues of illegal mining.
Okay.
The government is now gone to the court.
And the environmental clearances.
And the environmental clearances. The miners have been coming here asking for various facilities, asking for relief. Because of the trouble now, the villagers or people who work there in the mines, they have now started writing to the government. Because eventually, as I said, it eventually impacts the common man down the road. Coal India has said that it's helpless. It can't explore more mines because of go-no-go zone. And land acquisition remains a big problem. India needs to overcome all of this. India needs to get companies which are good into this. Big Indian companies should go abroad and try and seek expertise and bring them home and try and push the agenda here. Rather, move out like GMR did of a huge infrastructure project. Now again, infrastructure is an area where I'm looking at almost $1 trillion of investment over the next 5 or 7 years.
Yeah.
How will that come if I don't discuss it? You have Imran Khan there. If you engage him and other Pakistani leaders to discuss what immediately can be done to boost energy ties between India and Pakistan, I'm sure they will all sit down across the table and discuss. But once again, it will get mired in politics and people won't discuss it. So I guess Indian companies need to take this as a challenge and try and go to these forums to engage with various partners and ink agreement that can stimulate growth back home, bring those investors back home. And let's not leave that everything to the government. The government is there to clear the files. I think the pressure should be on the government from industry itself that they need to ink these projects, and that's vital. And if that happens, I can guarantee you, rather having those expensive $200 a plate dinner and watching the snow in the night, it's much better to discuss these hardcore businesses which India probably is not ready to discuss, because as Mr. Agarwal said, we are fairly happy with the domestic growth that is happening.
Mr. Sarkar, as somebody who represents a chambers of the industrial leaders of the country, what do you have to say about that? What Shantanu says, that Indian companies, instead of trying to perk up the growth sentiment in India, they made tall announcements about how they were investing in other areas across the world. That is something, if reversed, that would help in perking up the growth sentiment back home.
I don't know whether you'll agree with me, but let's look at the shortfalls that our country has. One was financial inclusion, which I talked about a little earlier. I feel also that if you look at the industrial climate in India, we went from trading to services directly. Industrial revolution somehow we missed. We did not really embrace the industrial revolution to the extent which we should have. For a large country like ours, today manufacturing is not our backbone at all, which is a pity, because if you do not have manufacturing as a backbone, if you look at any developed country in the world, I'm talking about the financial, from the financial angle, no country has ever developed without manufacturing, including China. India somehow bypassed that for whatever reasons. Now we need to get back to manufacturing, and manufacturing, if you give us proper facilities in this country, I'm not saying that the government is not willing, but point is that we do not have single window clearances here. It's very difficult to do business in India. These are factors which we must accept and which we need to improve upon. And only then we can, look at West in the eye and tell them that this is what we have. Now you have to come to us. They would come, because I don't think they have a choice. We are such a large country. The local demand is so huge that today I was talking to an American friend of mine, I just told him that you just build a road for me. Demand is, I'll create. Demand is not an issue in India. We do not have the facilities in India. So that is where we need to be a little worked up, because that's where we should be concentrating on, and that's what we should be talking at Davos, that let's get together and build the infrastructure, which I think is an area which we should be doing.
So you're saying the industry would love to assist India in perking up the growth sentiment back home, if its growth is facilitated, if policy making gives it the facilities that
the facilitation does not exist in this country.
Aman, your take on that?
You see, I feel India is fairly blessed, and I am fairly bullish on India per se. But when you talk about the factors, we are looking at partnership, and I think this needs to be understood by the world around and by our leaders as well, that what we are looking at is partnership. Let's share what we have with each other and get things up. A very important component which we end up not seeing is the parallel economy which we have in this country, which is almost as strong as the normal economy. And as a result, what happens is most people, when they come from developed regions in the world where they have very small or very little parallel economy, it is not they don't have, but they have smaller size of parallel economy, they are unable to make the same kind of revenues or structures which an Indian corporation is able to make. And that's where sometimes we end up seeing that growth components for India coming down. If you're actually projecting a growth of about 5 or 6% in this country, we're actually having an actual growth rate of about 9 to 10%, which is fairly very high because of the parallel economy being strong. And can we rectify it? I think the income tax department, the government is making all possible levels, but it's been almost 30, 40 years that they've been unable to do so. Could we be able to do it tomorrow? We do not know. We are still trying for it. With the emerging middle class and the power they have and the kind of salary structures they're getting now, I think this is rebounding in and structure is coming in. But the industry is stuck onto the old habits. So to think of that kind of a structure coming in, but we need to start understanding India first and making around the world economies to understand what India has to offer. India has to offer demand. India has to offer fulfilling needs. India has to offer structures which the West or the developed nations can come in and bring in and do it. Japanese have understood it to some extent, and as a result, a large amount of Japanese fund come in into infrastructure projects, other projects, fairly successful. They make their market, they make their moves, and they move out very comfortably. No problems at all. Russians have understood in the past, they come in, make their buck and move out. Whichever country or the industry understands this structure, comes in, makes money. There are a large number of corporations from almost all major countries in the world which have made a success story in this country. So I think that is what we need to highlight, to show that, look, we have the potential and we have you here already. Bring more.
Okay. Shantanu, almost time for me to wrap up. So very quickly, your take on Mr. Sarkar's defense of the industry.
I think I do agree to both the point. There is a fear factor and there is an issue that India has the growth. Two things we need to do and India needs to do and any other forums like this, because the world is also asking for these two things. We must have sustainable growth and we must create jobs. If India can tell the world the jobs are in India, I can guarantee you all this fear psychosis about India and the investment climate and trouble with the government will all go away. These two factors have to be handled at any popular forum, world forum or Indian forum. Things will be easy for India.
Okay. Well, I'm afraid that's all I have time for. Aman Agarwal, Shantanu Guhare, SK Sarkar, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you indeed.
Thank you.
That's all we have time for in this edition of Insight. Thank you so much for watching us. Do stay tuned to Lok Sabha television for more. Namaskar.